Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, Dutch lace, hearse, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks, Muslim donors. I'm a Useful Idiot. Welcome. And this is my third part in a series of topics I'm covering in videos that have to do with the American election cycle. And this turned out to be the most fascinating one of all, and resulted from a discussion I had with a longtime friend. And it's the whole idea of Muslim money coming into the U.S. For either propaganda or the election cycle, and very, very revealing. And so let's get down to the brass tacks here. Well, before I do that, let me say, too, that what I did find out, and there's no surprise here, is that there really isn't that much representation of the Muslim or Arabic side of Islamic side of any issues in the United States. As you would imagine, the Muslim lobby has pretty much fallen flat and fallen on deaf ears in the United States and doesn't really get much support. So it can't really compare. And therefore, it leaves a vacuum in which the Israeli narrative, which is carefully constructed, is the one that gets heard and is now so embedded in the American psyche from so many years of propaganda coming at them from all sides, but particularly because a lot of it comes within the United States' own media and government, and therefore gives it even more credence. So there is a vacuum of representation for Muslims in the United States, with the one exception being Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia, of course, is allied with Israel now and is very powerful and has a lot of money, and filters it into the United States to form public opinion about Saudi Arabia. That's generally their only concern. Their other concern that they funded is the fear of Iran. So the only narratives we're getting in the United States are the Saudi narrative and the Israeli narrative, both of which are pro-Zionist and both demonize Iran. So something to factor in. But anyway, let's go into some of these facts. So the Muslims would like to have the same kind of influence in the U.S. and U.S. elections, but really have no big donors. A professor from the University of Delaware said that, quote, most Muslim lobbying groups in the U.S. are small and local and deal with local issues. There are no real bundlers for Muslim interests, and rich and influential Muslim leaders have very, very few fundraisers, unquote. So there's a basic fact. Any Muslim groups that operate in the United States operate on a very grassroots level. And that's not surprising, because one of the things I found out was that the populations of Jews in the United States and the population of Muslims in the United States are not only about equal, but the very, very, very small percentage. There's 5.3 million Jews in the U.S., or 1.4% of the population, and 3.3 million Muslims in the U.S., or around 1% of the population. So we're talking about very small fractions. And so at 1% of the population, you wouldn't suspect that they would have a huge amount of presence in lobbying and American politics. But you could use the same rationale. How is it that 5.3 million Jews in the United States, a mere 1.4% of the population, have this massive amount of representation in the United States government and U.S. policies? And so anyway, there's two Muslims in Congress right now, and most Muslim advocacy groups that operate in the United States, like I say, are small and grassroots. For example, the Council on Islamic American Relations and the Muslim Public Affairs Council, and a group called Emerge USA, all very small and very, very grassroots. And total money raised by religious PACs since 2012 is very telling, and shows this unbalanced representation. $11 million raised by religious PACs, were Jewish since 2012. 4.5 million, or nearly half of what Jewish money was from Christian PACs. So that should shock a number of people. And then the bottom, $120,000 for Muslim PACs. That's right, $120,000 total money for Muslim PACs since 2012. And of course, these figures don't include Republican PACs that ostensibly are religious and support Jewish and Israeli causes. And so Jews have even more access to the government and our election cycle than even blacks and Latino communities. And so that's pretty surprising in itself as well. So as I mentioned, there's no Muslim policy think tanks in the U.S. like there are multitudes of Israeli-run and pro-Zionist think tanks in the U.S. Forming U.S. foreign policy. And it's virtually impossible for Muslims to raise money in the U.S. because there's so much prejudice against Muslims. Nobody really responds other than other Muslims in the community, which is 0.9% of the U.S. population. And of course, any association that any American government officials or political action groups or candidates, if they associate themselves with any of these Muslim groups, of course, it's political suicide. And so that's very telling there. It's a political success if you side with Israel and their policies, but it's political suicide if you associate with Muslims. And I suspect that's one of the reasons why all these very small, tenuous relationships that are purported to exist between Obama personally and people in his administration are blown way out of proportion, because just even suggesting that he knows somebody somewhere that might be a Muslim, that's enough of an association to be able to demonize someone. So there are a couple of PACs that have been. One of them, as I found, was pretty interesting. Is an article attached below. It talks about J Street PAC from 2008, and it's where Muslims contribute to pro-Israel parties. As odd as that is, only thousands of dollars they raised, and but still the Muslims creating a small PAC in order to support Israel. Although I'm sure there's much more to that story. And in 2014, there's, of course, lists of Democrats who have received money from the Middle East over the years: Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, and Al Gore, John Kerry, and Barack Obama. But looking at the figures, once again, it's pretty small. Barack Obama got $30,000 from any Muslim Middle Eastern money. And, of course, that same article doesn't bring up the fact that the Bush administration has a family relationship with the Sauds in Saudi Arabia, and undoubtedly gets hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of dollars surreptitiously through different front groups for their political aspirations. And then, interestingly, getting into the Saudi lobbying, as I mentioned in the other video, they don't really have any think tanks. They don't really have any Muslim groups in the United States. So they actually just hire American politicians, and also hire actual public relations firms and law firms in order to represent them and spread their propaganda. So there is some countering there, but obviously not as effective as Israeli lobbies. So Saudi lobbying and Saudi lobbying firm signed a Republican super PAC chairman, Norm Coleman, a former Minnesota senator. One of the interesting things about that as well is he served as the chairman of this super PAC that represented Saudi Arabia as well as the United States election candidates. So there we see a direct example of Saudi Arabian money going into the campaign, but just by a wiggly trail that is hard to follow. The Saudi government, of course, gave millions to the Clinton Foundation and also to the Middle East Policy Council and the Middle East Institute and the Atlantic Council, all not Muslim groups, all Zionist groups. So no surprise there that a lot of the Arab money coming into this country is going to be pro-Israel from Saudi Arabia. And it has more to do with getting involved with energy lobbying and the oil industry more than anything else, although public relations has been part of that. So Saudi Arabia money comes to the United States basically to manipulate energy policy, and they do a lot of lobbying through the American Petroleum Institute, ironically named the American Petroleum Institute. And oddly enough, the same Norm Coleman, the head of this PAC, condemned Saudi Arabia in Congress in 2005 for anti-Semitism, but later goes on to lobby for Saudi Arabia. And so there's some surprising facts about the Muslim money that is not coming into the United States, how little influence Muslims have on the election cycle and representation in the government. No lobbying groups, no think tanks, no donations, no super PACs. Even the one Arab American PAC that I found, its donations peaked in 2000 at $70,000. They're now down at $30,000. They gave no federal candidates any money during 2016. They get all donations, and basically all the money they get gets soaked up by their operating costs. So, wow, what a sad picture. I expected to see more Muslim money coming in, affecting policies here, but there really isn't that much. So once again, no real surprise that the Israeli narrative dominates in the United States, and the Muslim view is not represented. I don't think anybody should underestimate the power of marketing to affect public opinion. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.